buddy, put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning and welcome to the program. It is the Michael Dukes Show. We are broadcasting live, ready to go, rock and roll, and get things rolling. Thanks for coming in and being part of it today. We are jumping into it. We've got a lot of things to cover, including some discussions of a local nature. We're going to be talking with some candidates here and getting things squared away there. We've got Rob Yundt on the phone here. We're going to talk with him here in just a moment. Rob will be joining us. He's a candidate for the Alaska legislature from the MatSu. We'll be talking with him. And then in hour 2 today, we'll be talking with JD Tuccille from Reason Magazine about the upswell in homeschooling. Now, we know that there has been an uptick in homeschooling since COVID, but then, of course, it kind of leveled off. And later on, it kind of started to dip down, but it started to come back again. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we're going to talk with JD Tuccille about that in hour 2 this morning, and get things going on. So it'll be good. Tomorrow, as you know, is Firearms Friday. Your chance to sound off on issues of a Second Amendment nature, where we kind of focus on what's going on in the world of guns and firearms. And I mean, we got some interesting times right now. Some interesting times are going on across the country with in regards to firearms, especially with the nomination of Kamala Harris. That has really raised some eyebrows amongst the 2A community, and we'll see exactly what's going to happen with that as we go through here. And we'll have some discussions on that here again in hours 1 and 2 tomorrow, along with, of course, our friend Willie Waffle from wafflemovies.com. He'll come on board and joining us. He'll be coming on board and joining us to discuss that and more. That's all coming up tomorrow on the program with Firearms Friday. I mean, we couldn't ask for anything more. That's for sure. All right. But let's get started, I guess, on today, the rest of today. Let's figure out what's happening and what's coming down. We're going to talk again more about local politics. This is all about the candidate interviews and where people stand and what they're doing and what they believe in and everything else. And that's where we're going to get things started off this morning. And joining us right now on the telephone is a candidate for State House, Rob Yundt. And he joins us this morning to discuss it. And he's with us right now. Good morning, sir. How are you? Oh, okay. Hold on a second. We had a little snafu this morning, Rob. So hold the line for a second. I'm going to ring you right back. It didn't work. It works as usual, but then it didn't work. You know what it's like. You know when your technology is not working properly. what's happening there. So let's try that one more time, and we'll get Rob on the phone one more time this morning. Nope, that didn't work. Let's try it one more time. This is this is the problem when you get a low budget radio show. You're just trying to make it all work. You're trying to scab everything together. No, that's oh man. Sometimes life is a little tougher than you want it to be. Don't forget, you can always come out and join us on Facebook, facebook.com/Michael Duke Show, facebook.com/Michael Duke Show. If you want to be part of the chat room, we would love to hear from you here and have you come on board and share with the chat room and talk with them. There we go. That's what we were looking for. All right.
Good morning, Michael. How are you?
Yeah, good morning, sir. This is where we had a little technical difficulties. Rob couldn't connect through my streaming stuff, and my phone wasn't working. So it was six of one, half dozen of the other. But here we are, ready to go.
We've got all this technology in our lives to make it easier, and here it is making it more difficult.
Yeah, right? Remember when computers came out and they said it was going to lead to the paperless society, the paperless office? Remember that? I'm still trying to figure that out because I think I got more paper today than I used to have ever, but we'll do what we got to do. All right, Rob, well, let's sit down and talk about this. We want to figure out where we're at and see what's going on. We've been interviewing a lot of candidates, and of course we've got this is an important time because Alaska is facing a pretty difficult my argument is that Alaska is facing a pretty difficult future. And so I want to get started there and see, kind of where you're at. If folks don't know who you are, can you give us a little bit of background about who you are, where you came from, what this is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm born and raised Valley resident here. My mom was born and raised pre-statehood. Our great-grandpa came in the 40s. Prior to that, we got distant relatives that started coming all the way back in the late 1800s. So we've been here in Alaska for a while. I can tell you, I did not grow up aspiring to do anything like this. I believe we live in the greatest place in the world, and I believe we need some change. So here I am, back up 4 years, and 4 years ago today, or maybe 4 years in a month or something, I had never considered running for public office, but there was COVID was happening, and I was not happy with the direction we were headed in as a society in regard to local government control over its citizens. And so there were some ordinances moving forward at the MatSu borough. One was going to take away our health powers. One was going to absolutely slaughter Second Amendment rights, and another one. So anyways, I ran for assembly so that I could stop those ordinances from passing. Because at the time we had a left-leaning assembly, would be fair to say. That's a nice way of putting it.
Right.
Even though I ran on the fact that I was going to stop those ordinances, they actually passed one of them anyways the night I was sworn in, with smiles on their faces, in a 4-3 vote. And so it took a little bit of time, but I unwound that and reestablished our full and complete Second Amendment rights out here, which was a big deal. And then I was able to stop us from becoming a first-class government. And for those that don't know the difference, and most don't, the MatSu borough is a second-class borough. Anchorage is a first-class government, so Anchorage has emergency health powers. So a guy like Ethan Berkowitz can step in on any given day, whatever he feels like, and say, hey, you're going to wear masks, or you're going to have vaccines, or whatever that may be. And so my approach to that is I'm a very much a live and let live person. If you want to wear a mask, if you want to get a vaccine, I think that's amazing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's your right as a United States citizen. If you don't want to, I do not believe that the MatSu borough should be able to tell you to. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
So that's what got me off the couch. I've been here, working hard ever since. I don't ever want anybody to be able to say that I'm in this for the wrong reasons. I'm busy with my own life and my kids and my beautiful wife, and coaching wrestling and everything. So we donate my salary that I've made as an elected official, and we'll always continue to do so. We give it to local nonprofits. And I just honestly, I'm here trying to shape a fiscally responsible, free society so that our kids and grandkids have a great place to grow up. So.
Well, it all sounds like good reasoning. I mean, I feel some kinship there, because when I was in Fairbanks, that was kind of the my same thing. I ran for the assembly because I thought it was headed in the wrong direction, and you kind of got to do what you got to do, and so we stood up. Nobody else was going to stand up, so we might, I'll stand up, and it was let's just say it was an educational experience, if nothing else. Definitely an educational experience to get it all done. So Rob, the big show jumping up into the state level, is it the same kind of thing driving you? Was there another thing that, you basically said, was there a single issue, or was it cumulative? Are you mad as hell and not going to take it anymore? What was going on?
I never considered doing this, and back up to last August, actually, I think right before moose season, I had a little get together and fundraiser for my reelection campaign as an assemblyman, right? And so I've been appointed deputy mayor the last couple of years by our amazing mayor. So I'm running for reelection and have a little get together. There's, I don't know, 140, 160 people there. And so I open it up to questions and answers. And one of them asked me, have you ever considered running for a state office? And it really caught me off guard. I did not expect that. And I sat there and I paused for a moment, and I was intentional in my movements that night. I only had one person in the room from Juneau, right? It's nothing against anybody from Juneau. I know plenty of House reps and senators who are really good people, but I only invited one person and one person only. There was a reason, and her name is Shelley Hughes. And Shelley is very passionate, as am I, about protecting bathrooms and sports of our daughters, so that men cannot be sharing in those activities, right?
Right.
Or safe spaces. I don't want men in my daughter's bathrooms or my wives or in their sports. And Shelley's very passionate about that as well. So I had asked Shelley to come there that night and give, those folks an update on where we were at on a state level on trying to get that done, right? And so somebody asked me this, and I sat there and I paused for a moment. I kind of thought about it, and I said, if the legislature doesn't get this issue moving soon, I will go take somebody's job if I have to do it. And so fast forward, that I did not mean to, but what that did is get rumor mills started and everything. And I did not mean to do that. It was not my intention. I did not sign up for this seat until, I believe, middle to end of February. I was actually at a wrestling practice when I posted my announcement. It was not the most professional thing, but it was, hey, here I am sitting at the gym coaching wrestling practice, and I'm going to run for state senate. So, I'm not running because of any one person. What they did or didn't do. I'm running because I think I represent the MatSu borough's values better than anybody else. There are a few really big issues to me. That is obviously one of them. Parental rights is another one. I am not happy with where the Alaska State Senate sits currently in regard to parental rights. I've got 6 kids. I value parental rights. I think people should be able to have full, control over how they raise their child. There are systems in place to save children from bad parents, right? So the argument that some of these folks are trying to make that, we're going to allow a 16-year-old a path forward, they should be able to start a sex change in school with their school counselor because without parental permission, because their parents might not support it. Well, yeah, their brain's still developing, and you are still their parent at 16 years old, and you should be able to have a good conversation with your child about that. Your child should have to discuss that issue with you.
Yeah.
So, there's a movement right now to get everybody in line, to get states in line with Joe Biden's new policies and Title IX policies,
right?
Which it looks like the courts are going to strike down. But I'm not okay with that. I'm not in any way, shape, or form. So the argument from the other side is, well, there's parents that are abusive and there's parents that are this and that. And okay, there probably are, right?
Sure.
In fact, we know there are.
Sure.
We know there are. But what is that number? Is that number 1 in 100?
Yeah.
Is that number one in 200? Is it one in 500?
It just turned it around. It just turned it around and be like, okay, so what if we're going to have our counselor, come in and help the kid, get full body tattoos because the parents may not agree. I mean, is it whatever it is, the parents are the ones that are ultimately responsible, both financially, but also criminally and everything. I mean, the parents are responsible for these kids for so many things, and now they want to basically strip those rights out from parents,
right?
In so many
and
ways.
If there's an abusive, dangerous parent out there, there's already systems in place to handle that situation, right? So we do not need to pass legislation based on fear mongering that doesn't exist. And that's exactly what they're trying to use. And so there's a combination of things. Cook Inlet, guys, come on. We've been talking about Cook Inlet for 10 years, right? I mean, I've served on the board for Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. I believe I was at the time the youngest president in the history of the State Home Builders Association. I've been listening to people, important people, talk about issues in Cook Inlet and gas and different stuff for 10 years of my life, right?
Yeah.
Why have we not solved this issue? Why are we not using our own resources in Alaska? And now we're looking at the likelihood of having to import natural gas. Do you know how disgusting that is? We Alaska, we got more resources than anybody.
I want to get into this.
To bring it in.
I want to get into this, but we are up against the break, so we're going to take that break and we're going to come back. Rob Yundt is our guest, candidate for Senate District N. Will return here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Back with more right after this.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, welcome back to the program. We're in the commercial break right now. Rob Yundt is our guest. So, Rob, it's just you and me and 40 of our closest friends on the internet right now, hanging out, talking about things and doing everything else. Tell me a little bit more about your battle here. So we don't like to repeat too much for the podcast. We don't like to repeat during the commercial break. So we kind of diverge a little bit on the commercial breaks. And when you hear the ding, by the way, you'll hear a ringside bell. That means we've got to wrap up because we're about to rejoin the radio. Tell us a little bit more about your battle here in the assembly, because I was kind of following this at a distance. I'll be honest with you. When I got down here, I literally had just left the assembly in Fairbanks when I moved down here. And so when I got down here, I kind of just dropped the hand grenade and said, I'm done with that. I'm not even going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on state stuff. And so I was kind of watching from a distance this whole battle that you guys had going on in the MatSu. And I was quite astonished, honestly, with some of the actions that I read about. So give us a little more backstory on this. When you came in there and they decide to literally give you the proverbial finger, swear you in, and then give you the finger as they take that last vote. Walk me through that, because that was just astonishing to hear about.
Yeah, there was a new ordinance that they swore or passed that night, and it would have made it virtually impossible. I would say actually impossible for anybody that was not a multimillionaire to ever open another gun range in the MatSu borough, right? And we're talking about a community as large as the state of West Virginia. Okay. So there was already stringent rules in place. Like, it would have been impossible to open a gun range prior to that ordinance, say in downtown Wasilla or Palmer, and as it should be, right? I mean, if you're going to do an outdoor one, it's going to affect people. There's no big pieces of property left in these areas. So you already had protections in place for that, but now they're going to make it impossible for anybody that isn't a multimillionaire to do it anywhere in the MatSu borough, which again, like I said, is the size of West Virginia. So obviously I ran opposed to that ordinance, and I ran opposed to the idea that our local government could have emergency health powers, right? So and I broke the record for most votes ever in an assembly race with more than one person. And so you would think that maybe my voters meant something, but no. That
Right.
evening they passed it anyways. Four of them with smiles on their faces, and so I got that turned around. We fixed that problem. We've had a great amount of results on the assembly since, and I want to back up prior to when I got elected. So I helped a gentleman out here started a ballot initiative, and this is important because this needs to be done on the Kenai Peninsula Borough. It needs to be done in Fairbanks. It needs to be done in multiple other locations in Alaska. A ballot initiative to change the date of our local elections from October, ours was, and some are in April, right? Some other parts of Alaska, to November, so that everybody could vote for your assembly member and your school board member the same evening that you vote for the president of the United States of America or the governor
Right.
or whatever it may be. And
Right.
so what happened magically, I mean, imagine this, but voter turnout went up over 400%. And so,
shocking. I know.
Shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, is that not crazy? Imagine that. And so election integrity, I helped with that ballot initiative before I ran. I personally went out and raised over 100 signatures and got it done. And then what that does not do anything except for give the voters an option to have a voice on it. And so a ballot initiative puts that thing on the ballot the next time. And so in 2019, it was on the ballot. And even though it was a low voter turnout, right, because it was an October election on an odd year, everybody overwhelmingly said, yes, that's a good idea. That's a really good idea.
Because you're wasting our time. You're wasting the state, the borough's time, this extra money, this extra time and everything else. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, and there's a reason why they change these kind of things. Look at what happens in Anchorage, with it being in April, et cetera, et cetera. All right, hold the line, Rob. We're going to jump back into this. We're 5 seconds out. Please like and share, folks. Like and follow. Subscribe, ring the bell on YouTube, do whatever you need to do. Here we go, the Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Huh. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
That's right. Not your daddy's talk radio. We are ready to go. Continuing on, Rob Yundt, our guest candidate for Senate District N. He's with us. We were just kind of talking about the brief overview of where he came from and everything else. Let's get down into some details. Rob got ahead of me a little bit there, started talking about some of it. But before we get to South Central Gas and some other issues, let's talk for a minute here about the big elephant in the room last year. And that, of course, was school funding. Rob, we saw the newspapers continue to parrot the things that the Democrats and some of the Republicans who are pro-big government said, over and over and over again about how dare we, in the Greta Thunberg voice, how dare we not fund education properly, that it had been flat funded, that if we didn't fix it, the kids were all going to be homeless and live on the streets and cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria. And yet here we are. And ignoring the reality that we had increased the BSA, although only slightly, we'd continued to pay millions and millions and millions of dollars. The smallest was 10 million. The largest was 176 million in a single year over what the BSA was paying. It is the second largest budget item in the budget at $2.4 billion that they're paying out to education. And so my question is, if Rob Yundt had been in the Senate, standing on the floor, making arguments, talking about this thing, what's your position on this? I mean, is it too much? Is it not enough? And if it's not enough, how much is enough in that question?
I should speak specifically to the MatSu Borough and our schools and our school board and finances out here because I understand it a lot better than I do other communities, right? So a couple times I've been put in the position of lowering what we give to our school board out here for their budget. And this is not state money or federal money or anything. This is just local money. I've not done that because our school board is so darn fiscally responsible that and they're just, I can't even say this enough. Our school board is absolutely amazing out here, right? So I've not done that at the local level because, again, they're very responsible. We actually just built a school out of pocket, $20 million, and we built 23 or 4 million, and we built it with no loans. Because we're a second class borough, we had to go to the voters and ask them permission to bond it, which means to borrow the money. But we didn't actually, we got their permission. They said, yes, you can go borrow the money, but then we didn't do it. We put in the money and we did it out of pocket. And so that's been my experience. Our education out here is our test scores are much higher than national average, and they've been on the uptick massively for the last 5 years since our school board, I guess you could say, has become a lot more common sense, right? And so, at the state level, each community is so much different. You really have to look at that. I will tell you this: I definitely believe we spend enough money up here. I think could be spent 100 times more efficiently. I don't necessarily know that we need 50 superintendents in the state of Alaska or whatever it is. I think there's 50 something superintendents, so you're lacking major efficiency there. It's bad. I don't think the homeschool allotment is large enough. If you choose to homeschool your parent, I believe you should have access to the same exact amount of funds as you would be given if you took them to any other school. Does that make sense? We've seen the changes that Florida and Mississippi have made, and it's not a coincidence that they're number one and number two in the entire country now in education. And so backpack funding, in my opinion, is where we really need to get to. That's a term that's used for basically saying that your money goes with your child. And so if you decide to homeschool or go to a private school, whatever that may be, then you can take your entire amount with you. Right now, it's not the case anywhere in Alaska. Nobody gives the full amount to a child trying to do that. There's a phenomenal private school in Fairbanks. It's actually a wrestling program up there called the Student Wrestling Development Program, and it's really the only thing in Alaska like it. It's the only reason it can happen, though, is because the owner is a retired military veteran, and he's dedicated his entire life to helping kids. And so he works for free, basically. He's not making any money because he only charges the families the tiny little amount of that the allotment is, right? And so it's like, it's the coolest thing in all of Alaska, in my opinion, by far. Fairbanks is lucky to have it. And you could have more programs out there like that. Not saying wrestling programs, I'm just saying like private schools with 20, 50, 100, 200 kids, right? That do turn out substantially higher results for less money. You could do that if you got backpack funding done. So that will be my goal. My goal is to get that done and then let the system fix itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're a huge fan of backpack funding here on the program. I mean, I homeschooled all 5 of my kids. And so I think it's important. I mean, the question becomes, and David in the chat room, asked the question, why is a homeschool kid worth 90% of what a brick and mortar school kid is, or less? I mean, in some cases,
Well, it's way less.
Yeah.
It's way less than 90 because they're tricking you when they tell you they're giving you 90%. They're not telling you the truth, right?
Right.
So let's talk about this BSA. I get good humor out of this when people start making the argument it's too high or it's too low. And most people don't even understand it's actually just a small percentage of what we spend. And so the BSA compared to what we actually spend is low. Now, that does not mean saying it needs to be higher. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we spend an average of 20 grand a year in Alaska, give or take, right, per student. And the BSA is substantially smaller than that. And most people don't know that. So really backpack funding should be, 100%, but it shouldn't be 100% of the BSA. It should be 100% of that other number. Does that make sense? Because what they do is they give this BSA to each and every child. You're all the same. And then they find other reasons to give extra money to children because of X, Y, Z, A, issue, or your child has a reading issue. No, he doesn't or she doesn't, but they do. And you don't realize it's because the school's trying to get more money, right? It's like, the deaths in America for cancer and for the common cold went way down in 2021. Why was that? Right? The same amount of people in the country were passing away as before, but now nobody's dying of the flu anymore. They're all
Right.
dying of, right?
Right.
And it's because it was subsidized. So now they start putting people in a box. Well, we have a relative that passed away of cancer during that time, right? I mean, I don't know this to be factual. They did have COVID when it happened, right? But come on, they were weak due to their current medical condition, and I'm sure it got wrote down as COVID. I didn't go look at the medical records, but that number was through the roof, and suddenly the cancer deaths and the common flu deaths were in the tanks because you were subsidizing COVID at that time, right?
Right.
So I don't know.
You get so many dollars. You get so many dollars for every COVID death to help offset the cost of fighting it and everything else. And so then everything. I mean, that's the thing. Subsidies create this same kind of problem. I mean, stretching back from COVID, it could go back to things like college tuition. The minute you start subsidizing college tuition, all of a sudden college tuition becomes becomes increasingly expensive. Why? Well, because they're subsidizing it. There's more money out there, so we can go ahead and raise this is the problem with subsidies.
Hands down, college education, if you go back and you look at inflation from when the government got involved, is by far the biggest ripoff in the United States of America. They are ripping these kids and their families off. And I say that as a guy, my eldest daughter's starting her third year of law school right now. She's doing 2 internships this summer, which did not make me happy because she did not come home from college, but because of these internships. But so I've had to maneuver the system as well. It's been very expensive, but our family is sacrificing to get it done because she's wanted to be an attorney since she was a little girl. And so, but it is an absolute ripoff. And yeah, when you subsidize it, I mean, kids used to be able to work hard, our grandparents' generation and even our parents, get a job and work themselves through college and pay for it as they want if they wanted. And then the government got involved. And now it's like, we have these colleges with literally billions of dollars in their bank accounts, billions of dollars. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And they're still, it's crazy. Very, very similar situation with the Alaska educational system. We do not need to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
In fact, I would say society's been around long enough now that we should almost never be in reinventing the wheel. Let's just go look at who's had success and duplicate it. And I would say look very closely at the state of Florida and the state of Mississippi. It is not a coincidence that education costs substantially less and their results are substantially higher. And that's because they let their parents choose where they want to send their kids, and they give them the same amount of money as, they're all treated equally. And so then the parents get to create a free market, and that will fix the whole situation. We have amazing teachers out here in the MatSu borough. I can't speak for the whole state. I'm sure there's great ones. A majority of teachers are amazing. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a school teacher, and I destroyed my knee my junior year in high school, and so I couldn't. Once the wrestling scholarships weren't going to come in anymore, my family couldn't afford to send me to college. Right. So
right.
I've been coaching out here for 20 years. I'm super close friends. We have phenomenal teachers that are, but the system could be much more efficient, and they would be happy about that.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, this is part of the problem, because we know this is coming back this next session. They didn't get what they wanted. They wanted $1,400 in the BSA. They only got it up to $650. And so it's coming back. And again, speaking of teachers, we know teachers are really the pivotal part of this whole educational thing. And yet even this BSA is really the wrong argument, because it's not getting into the classrooms. And that's a whole different deal in and of itself. All right, we got a little long-winded there. We're bumping up against the next break. I do want to talk about long-term fiscal plans. And I do want to talk about, since you brought it up, I want to talk about South Central Gas. We'll see if we can squeeze all this in the last segment. Rob Yundt is our guest. We're going to continue with him here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio will continue. Rob Yundt, candidate for Senate District N, is with us. We'll return right after this.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, Rob Yundt is our guest. We continue here, getting things ready to go. Rob, I guess a couple questions that we'll do during the break because we're running short on time here today. One of the biggest problems, and especially people who live here in the MatSu like you and me, one of the things that we were most infuriated about was basically the emasculation, I guess I would say, of our elected representatives. They were basically, they say nobody puts baby in the corner, but they put him in the corner. So Shelley Hughes, Mike Shower, and Rob Myers from Fairbanks all basically shut out of the caucus.
They got totally taken out of the process.
Exactly.
Yeah, very, very unfortunate.
Yeah,
very unfortunate.
And basically it disenfranchises all their constituents because they really don't have a seat at the table. They don't have a say on anything that's going on. And this was really shocking considering the fact that the Senate had a majority of Republicans. So if you go back to Juneau, or if you go to Juneau rather, would you give in to the powers that be and join their binding caucus, or would you stand with the conservatives?
I've said this.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've said this multiple times. I believe the binding caucus should be illegal, and some states have made it as such. And so I can work with anybody. I treat everybody with respect, but I've gotten the work done on the MatSu Borough Assembly with the Republicans. And I do believe I know we represent the best future and the values of our state as a whole, but we darn sure do of the MatSu Borough. This is the most conservative part of Alaska. I can work with anybody. I will never I wouldn't join a binding caucus of 20 Republicans. Right. Nobody's going to own my vote with any sort of guaranteed agreement before I ever even look at what I'm signing. It should not work that way. With that being said, I treat everybody with respect. I'll work with anybody, but I'm damn sure going to get good business done with the Republican Party. That's what I'm doing. And
yeah. Well, that's always been the big question because, again, this whole binding caucus thing has tied the hands of the legislature so much, and then they have a political crutch to fall back on to say, well, I had to because I was in the caucus. And why would you give away your vote before you've ever seen a single word or line of legislation written? Why would you guarantee your vote on it before anything's ever gone up?
It shouldn't even be legal.
Yeah. What your opponent's out there, and I'm ambivalent at best and hostile at worst to a lot of his positions on things. What do you think separates you out from David Wilson, your opponent right now, most on this? What do you think? If you people were saying side by side, why should I vote for you? What's your big position here? We got about 2 minutes.
Fresh ideas. I mean, fresh ideas, fresh energy. I'm not here because of something anybody did or didn't do, right? And I don't want to attack or go after any one person. I'll just say that what I'm after is the system. I'm after the system, right? So I want to lead Alaska in a common sense, conservative direction, bring out the best in everybody around me, just like I've done on the assembly. Treat it like a sporting event, treat it like a business where you jump in, you work hard, you try to build things from the ground up like I've done my entire life and help lead the team. And so that's how I want to look at it, right? It is a team game, and I'm going to work hard with the Republican Party to get good business done in Alaska. With that being said, like I said, I treat everybody with respect. I'm never gonna go after any one person just because maybe they're not the same as me or whatever. So Alaska's got issues, man. Look at our budget. We spent $90 million last year fighting wildfires. We only did $1 million in timber harvest. Nobody in Juneau was smart enough to step back in 1999 after Bill Clinton shut us down and say, oh, we have more timber on state land alone than the entire West Coast. We could keep those 4,000 jobs going.
Yeah.
By the way, we're down to like 60 now. We've dropped from 4,000 down to less than 100. And, you look at all these big fires that we've had in the MatSu Borough and other parts of Alaska. Well, if we'd been harvesting the timber responsibly, right? Those things wouldn't have happened. We could have prevented that. And if you took the $1 million a year in sales timber harvest up to 50 million, you would drop the 90 million fighting wildfires probably down to 30 to 50 million, right? So now you're talking $100 million more revenue for the PFD.
Right.
And, we don't have things happen like the Miller's Reach fire.
Right.
You have to be able
more
to,
resources,
I don't know. And so
more resources, more jobs, more everything all coming together. I mean, it seems like that's a win-win-win, but,
this is common sense.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing they call it common. It's so rare, Rob. That's our motto here on the program. This is Common Sense Radio. We're trying to put the common back in sense. That's what we're trying to do. All right. Rob Yundt is our guest. Rob, I'm going to ask you to concise your answers down just a little bit because I want to get to fiscal policy and to the South Central gas, and then to your summation. And we've only got about 12 minutes to do it. So
South Central gas, I'll make it quick because it's very important. I brought it up.
We're 10 seconds out. I got it. We're going to rejoin, so don't go anywhere. Hold the line. We're going to get started on this. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe. Here we go.
Yeah, the cooking the gas thing. Let me.
Public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke Show.
All right, Rob Yundt is our guest candidate for Senate District N. We're about to jump into it. We've only got this final segment here. I do want to get to fiscal policy, but he mentioned Alaska gas. And Rob, you said something that just kind of, quite honestly, it's a pet peeve for me. We know that South Central, we know that Alaska's got 17 trillion cubic feet of gas on the North Slope. We know that there's still gas in the Cook Inlet. And I know it infuriates a lot of people that people would even be talking about importing gas, but there's a problem here. The problem is economics. The problem is, how do we get gas from the North Slope, or how do we get gas out of Cook Inlet in a viable economic way? So that we can burn Alaska gas. And I know a lot of people have got an emotional tie to, well, we're full of gas, we should just burn our own. The problem is the economics. Sure. Okay, so what if it costs 3 times as much to burn gas from the North Slope, or 3 times as much to burn gas from the Cook Inlet? That's an economic issue. And so this idea that we should be so averse to importing as to basically either submarine the economy because the costs go up so much, or we were talking about subsidies earlier, subsidizing the oil industry or the gas industry to try and force them to use Alaska gas. I mean, neither one of these is a good option at the moment. So give me your thoughts on gas real quick.
We have all the resources we need in this state. We should have been doing a hydro plant. They were talking about another hydro, back when me and you were kids, right? Don Young was talking about that. We've got coal here, the cleanest coal in the world, which is Fairbanks is blessed to have access to. We've got the same strain down here on 1/3 of the property they've tested. 1/3. There's enough to power the MatSu Borough and Anchorage for 150 years, right? And the new coal technology is the cleanest out there. It's unbelievable. We have so many things we can do here that we don't need to be importing natural gas. We need to use our own resources. And so,
that's
this
great.
Cook Inlet
And
crisis.
That's great. But again, it comes back to who pays for all this stuff. Because otherwise, what we're talking about, Rob, is subsidies, which you and I both agree.
Private sector's ready to go on private sector. It does not need to be subsidized to go build a coal power plant. It doesn't need to be at all, right? And so, the Fairbanks one isn't subsidized. Right.
Right. But we're talking, let me talk about timelines, though. I mean, short term versus long term. We're talking about we're going to be starting to run out of gas and starting to have some problems in 2 to 3 years. Right. It takes.
Well, now they're calling it a crisis because they ignored it for so long.
Exactly.
They're calling it a crisis.
And we understand
in 4
that
to 6 years.
I understand that it's manufactured, but the thing is, to stand up a coal plant, to stand up a hydro dam, to stand up all these other ideas, which are all great ideas. I'm 100% with you. I mean, those are 10-year projects. It'll take you 5 to 10 years.
Hydro is.
Well, it would take
hydro
you. It would take you at least 5 years to stand up a coal plant simply through the permitting process, if they even allowed it. So again, I'm looking for a short-term solution here, and by short-term, I'm talking about a 10-year period. We've got to acknowledge that importing is something that's got to happen there.
Yeah, it's a terrible idea. We're sticking our kids and grandkids with expensive gas and electricity the rest of their life if we start importing it. Coal plants done in 4 to 6 years. They can permit it. Joe Biden just had $2 billion in his last package for coal power plants. Nobody wants to talk about that. Even they've recognized that the new technology is unbelievable. And so you're gonna see that come back. West Virginia is the biggest coal user and developer in the country, and they've been led by a Democratic senator for the last X amount of years, right? So that one wouldn't take as long. We see nuclear out there. That has become nuclear could solve all our problems and fast, right? There's lots of options other than just starting to import natural gas.
Right.
It is a terrible idea. NSTAR is going to spend $50-something million to prepare for that import, right? So they can do it. And guess who's going to pay the bill on that?
Well,
Me and you.
We're all paying the bill. Everything you've just lined out, I agree with you 100%. We should have been working on this stuff 20 years ago because all of this energy generation stuff has a very long tail. It's a 20-year window that it should have started. You start from day one, you figure it's going to be 15 to 20 years before it really starts to run up at full speed and everything else. So the question is, in the interim, because the gas is starting to decline and we're going to start having problems in 3 years. In the interim, what do we do?
I'm going to have to look at those numbers, Michael. I mean, I don't know, right? I wish if I had been in Juneau for the last few years, I don't think we'd be in this position. I could have looked at them before, and I think I would have been, I guarantee you, I would have been pushing a lot harder to do the things we're just talking about, but I can't give you an exact answer right now when I haven't had access to that information.
Right. Well, I mean, but see, that's part of the problem is their answer, and the legislature in this last session tried to, we'll just give royalty relief to the gas companies for exploration, which means we're paying for it. We're still paying for it. Yeah. We're all paying for it. And that's the thing. We're subsidizing it through royalty relief or, tax credits, God forgive, tax credits of some kind and everything else. But the problem is that we put this off long enough that it's become a crisis in some way, whether it's manufactured or not. And we have to look at everything that's on the table. I, too, would love to burn Alaska gas. But I also understand that even if it's a short-term solution to import, we shouldn't just turn our nose up at it and say, well, that won't. I mean, if the cost of heating and electricity generation in the South Central area goes up 50 or 100% because we refuse to talk about imports, that doesn't do anybody any good. That doesn't do anybody any good.
That's terrible. I'll tell you this. So I think what you're asking, and I'll just say, correct me if you're wrong. If you looked at importing and you said if importing was more cost effective than going out and subsidizing pulling gas here, then absolutely you import. You do whatever is going to be cheapest for the Alaska resident, period, end of story. That's it, right? You do whatever's going to be the most cost effective for us. The problem is even that scenario is terrible. It's like looking at the federal issue right now and say, oh, inflation's down to 4%. Okay, cool. It's not 10% anymore, but it's still 4% building on the previous 10% because you were fiscally irresponsible to begin with. Yeah. So stop trying to act like heroes right now. Don't act like a hero, because you got inflation down to 4%, right? The cost of milk is still double what it used to be. The cost of eggs is still double what it used to be. So right now, the natural gas situation, we need to do whatever's most cost effective for our people today and today only. But we have to start working on.
Oh, I would agree with that. I'm agreeing with that. I'm just saying that maybe the short-term solution for the moment, and by short-term, I mean 10-year, is importation of gas. Maybe. We shouldn't just turn our nose up at it. Everything should be on the table at this point.
I'm going to tell you there's no way you're going to be able to not do that. Like, I think we're at a point now where we absolutely have to.
Exactly.
So we need to maneuver whatever's the most cost effective for our residents. So.
I want to get down to the fiscal plan. Alaska's really, I mean, you want to talk about a crisis. We've created our own crisis. We've had out of control spending in this for 4 decades of spending in this state. It keeps going on. The Fiscal Policy Working Group came up with a plan. Ben Carpenter's been trying to spearhead that out of the House. It really has not gained any traction. The answer seems to be just spend more. Do you have a fiscal plan? Do you support the ideas put forward by the Fiscal Policy Working Group? How do we control Alaska's spending? How do we, keep or maintain or even return to full PFD to people? You got about 2 minutes here.
Yeah, we are the most special interest driven state in the entire country. Look, if you ever want to look at special interest, just get on people's APOC reports, right, and see who's on there. I am proud to say there's not one union, there's not one PAC, there's not one elected official in Juneau on my APOC. It is clean as a whistle with just normal, everyday people that live in the valley. Now, or that were born in the valley and don't live here now, whatever it may be. But my point is we're special interest driven very heavily. Everybody's got to give money to their little cause. We need to focus on the basics. We need to do things like timber harvesting that could create, 50 million plus more a year in revenue. It could also reduce 50 plus million a year more in expenses. Our Department of Corrections budget is just massive compared to what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. What's the difference? Well, you can start sending people to private prisons again, like we used to. We don't have to keep them all here. If you sent only half of them out of state, or long-term ones, we'd shave 120 million a year off the budget there. It's not the end of the world. We used to do it. We used to do it not that long ago. And so there's so many ideas out there and so many options, but we got to start, we have to treat every dollar like it's our own. That's what elected officials need to do. They need to treat every dollar like their husband or wife was balancing the checkbook with their children at home. And that's what we've done in the MatSu borough. I've lowered the mill rate 19%. We've paid off 80 million in debt. I got our credit score increased. I mean, what we've done in the MatSu borough is exactly what we need to do at the state level.
I mean, I would agree with that. All right. I'm coming down to the last 90 seconds. So I want your elevator pitch. You've just bumped into somebody. Tell them why they should vote for Rob Yundt. How do folks find out more about you, websites, et cetera, et cetera? Give us the pitch. Here you go.
Yeah, Juneau needs change. Obviously, people like myself, people like Hadukovich up in Fairbanks, folks like us would not be running if things were going great. I'm busy. I'm coaching wrestling. I will tell you, the kids that I'm coaching, that age group's phasing into high school now. State tournament ends in December, so I'll have the free time in my hands during session now to help lead Alaska in a better direction. But we need change. We need people that have signed checks before, that have built businesses from the ground up. We need people that actually have been born and raised in Alaska, multi-generational. That I don't care if gas triples in price. I'm not moving. I'll just go back to cutting wood. Right. So right. I'm not leaving. I'm going to be here the rest of my life. My kids will be too. We need more people like that, and we need fresh ideas. So I would say go out there and vote for, the new person on the ticket with proven results like myself that can get stuff done.
All right, Rob Yundt, candidate for Senate District N. Appreciate you coming on board. Thanks very much.
Mike, if anybody wants to know more, robforalaska.com. That's my website.
All right, robforalaska.com. All right, Rob, hold the line for 1 second here. Folks, we're out of time. JD Tuccille from Reason Magazine up next. All right, Rob, I know you got to go here, but I just wanted to give you an extra minute or so. If there's anything we didn't hit on or anything you wanted to expand on, you got about 2 minutes here, and we'll let you go.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It just getting back to common sense, right? This really hit me last year when I was in Pennsylvania. That's where my family's from, my mom's side, and hit a family reunion. There's 150 people there, most of whom I've never met. And every single one of them came up and said, till the day my mom died or my grandpa or my grandma or whatever, their biggest regret is they didn't follow your side of the family, your great grandpa, your grandpa. They didn't follow them to Alaska. And it really hit me being back there coaching a wrestling camp for a couple of weeks, how good we got it here. And I don't want to become Pennsylvania where everybody's dream job is at the local, as a bureaucrat because you get some health insurance, right? There's no real true opportunity left there anymore. Nobody just goes from the mobile home park, trailer park to self-made like I've been able to do in Wasilla. I don't want to become Pennsylvania. I don't want to become California. This is Alaska. We need to continue to be the land of the free. We need to be fiscally responsible. We need to take care of our seniors and our elders. I increased the property tax exemption out here for seniors and disabled vets massively. I think 25-30%. And then I tied it to inflation. So it always changes. This is a hard place to retire. It does not do the family nucleus any good if all of our grandparents are retiring in Arizona because they can't afford to be here. We got to take care of our seniors, right?
Right.
So, I could talk all day about this stuff. I know you got to go. I do appreciate your time. It means a lot. A lot of great questions today. If anybody wants to know more, just go to my website, robforalaska.com. It's all spelled out. My cell phone number's on there. Call or text me anytime. I'm easy to get a hold of. And so.
All right, Rob Yundt, thank you so much for coming on board. I appreciate it. Thank you for being part of it today.
Yes, sir. Take care. Thanks.
All right, Rob Yundt, our guest here in hour one of the Michael Duke Show. Getting ready to rock and roll. We got JD Tuccille going to be joining us here in just a moment as we continue on here. Good, a little mixed bag. Subsidies for education bad. Didn't really come out right and say we had to subsidize gas or anything else, but there is some implications there. It's the first time talking to Rob, so we'll bring him back on to talk about this more, because I think this is going to be one of the important issues. I mean, how much is it going to cost for us to fix this gas crisis? What is it going to take? And I don't know. It's I just don't know. It is definitely a frustrating thing to watch. And what is, I want an articulated, this is what I want. This is what I want from candidates. I want an articulated position on stuff like a fiscal plan. I don't want it to be kind of amorphous and everything else. And I get a little leery of any candidate who comes up and says, my fiscal plan is to expand the revenue through whatever it is. I mean, especially if they're like, I'm totally against taxes, but I'm all about expanding the revenue for resources or parks and rec or whatever it is. I'm a little leery of that because, one, that's kind of betting it on the if come, right? And two, the time frame of what it's going to take to stand that up. How long does it take to stand up new revenue, and how long till you start seeing that come in? That's always the problem. Is that we don't see I want to timber, his idea of timber. I think it's a fantastic idea. How long does it take to stand that up? How long does it take to go from 100, timber cutting, worker employees in the economy back to 4,000? And what kind of money does that generate in state revenues? All these things need to be analyzed. I want a little bit of a bigger and a better fiscal plan of how we're going to get out of this. Again, the Fiscal Policy Working Group, I think, is a good outline. Is it perfect? No. But at least it's a good, solid plan with multiple facets that you can kind of wrap your brain around. I don't want kind of some of this more amorphous, we need to, our parks and recs will bring more, our long trail will bring in more tourists, and that'll give to the state. I mean, again, these amorphous numbers, like, okay, I'm looking for some hard numbers now. We're going to be out of money. We're going to be in deficit spend starting, basically next year. And within the next 3 years, it'll be upwards of almost $1 billion in deficit spend. I don't want the only answer to be, well, we'll just take it from the permanent fund dividend. I want there to be some kind of solution. I want it to be articulated. And so, again, I'm a little leery when the fiscal plan is we need to expand our revenues, because part of the reason that we got here is because we can't control our spending. I've said for years we have a spending problem. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. But that spending problem went on so long that now we have both a spending and a revenue problem because we've created a dependency state on top of it. So when I ask for a fiscal plan, I want a fiscal plan that is articulated. Not, I think that this will work, and JD Tuccille is in the green room. Hey, JD, how are you doing?
Doing well, and you?
Good. I'm just checking the audio, making sure you're good. We're going to pull you back here. We're going to get started here in just a few seconds. So hold on the line. my brother from another mother, JD Tuccille there. Don't we look alike? It's amazing. All right, we're going to continue here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. Here we go, hour 2 dead ahead.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning and welcome to it, hour 2 of the big radio broadcast for this beautiful, wet and rainy Thursday. Thanks for coming. It's raining across the state. I don't know what it's like in Fairbanks, but for everything from like Talkeetna south, it's all just rain. And I mean, it's good, but at some point I have to get my rubber duckies out because it's almost biblical in some cases. Anyway, still better than snow. I'll say that right off the bat. Still better than snow. Joining us hour 2 here today, JD Tuccille from Reason Magazine. We're going to talk. I have so much I want to talk to JD about because he's written so many good pieces over at Reason in the last couple, 3 weeks. He's been a very busy guy. I haven't had a chance to get him back on. But today we're going to start off at least talking about homeschooling and education because there's some really interesting news. And we can see how the education industry as a whole is just puckered up big time because they're seeing some handwriting on the wall that they definitely do not like. And so we're going to get into this with JD Tuccille from Reason Magazine. He joins us this morning to discuss. Let's get to it. Good morning, JD. How are you, my friend?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Well, as always, it is literally my pleasure to have you on the program. Again, I get to fanboy a little bit because JD writes so many good pieces out there talking about all kinds of stuff. Sometimes we get an article specifically that I could just bring in and talk about. And this is one of those articles, JD. You wrote this here, came out a couple days ago, talking about homeschooling. Now, we know that during COVID, homeschooling became kind of the default for many people because the schools were shut down and everything else. Regular schools were trying to homeschool, even though they had no idea how to do it. The track record for most brick and mortar schools trying to do this distance learning was abysmal. Many parents discovered that, well, if it's that easy, I'll just do it myself. And a lot of people discovered what I call the lie. The lie has been for years, oh, you're not smart enough to teach your kids. You're not, it's too hard. It's a huge commitment. It's just go down the laundry list of things that the establishment said over and over and over again. And people discovered that was not the truth. And so so homeschooling spiked tremendously during COVID, then came back down post-COVID, but at a higher level. And now it's starting to come back up, and I want to talk about this because it just makes me giggle. So tell me what you found out in this new article, which, by the way, I'll link in the chat room. It's entitled "Homeschooling Grows as an Escape from Failing Schools and Curriculum Fights," which is a deeper part of this. So here we go. JD, tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, this was really interesting. I mean, according to the Census Bureau, about 11% of all students were being homeschooled at the peak of the surge during the pandemic. And that's back when so many public schools were either closed or completely dropping the ball of remote learning. They just couldn't figure out how to do it or didn't care to figure it out. A lot of private schools are closed or subject to social distancing rules. And so families by default had to pick up the ball and teach their own kids. And the question was, okay, are they going to like it? Are they going to dislike it? Is it going to stick? Now, before the pandemic, about 2.8% of students, as an estimate, were being homeschooled across the United States. So that surged to 11%. And that was the peak. And what happens is that we knew that there was a drop off afterwards. Schools reopened, parents went back to the old familiar, except that a lot of them weren't so comfortable with the old familiar anymore. We knew that homeschooling rates were elevated, well above where they were before the pandemic. And now the Census Bureau, and what they call the Household Pulse Survey, which are these snapshots of the population taken every few months, finds that homeschooling is growing again this year. And North Carolina, which keeps the most detailed statistics about homeschoolers in the country, also agrees homeschooling is back in the rise. It hit a peak of about 179,000 students in North Carolina at the peak of the pandemic. It dropped down to about 153,000 in the 22-23 school year. And now it's back up, according to their figures, to about 158,000. So we're seeing it's growing in the one state that really keeps detailed figures. Idaho also reports that it's growing. Texas reports that it's growing. And the Census Bureau, looking at numbers across the entire United States, says that between last year and this year, the number of homeschoolers seems to have risen from about 3.6 million to about 4 million students. And they had estimated last year that about 5.82% of students were being homeschooled. So we're now up over 6%, which means that we're well over half. We're at about half of that surge from the pandemic has been retained, or we've grown back to it. And we've more than doubled the figures from before the pandemic in terms of families taking responsibility for educating their own children.
It's just fascinating because, again, I think a lot of this came from the fact that people, it was funny because during the pandemic, I had people who were in the chat room of the show here who would say, we put our kids in homeschool because of all the fervor around COVID and everything else. And they discovered that our kids, they loved it. Now, it's not for everybody. It's not for every kid. It's not for every parent. I would personally advocate that everybody should try it at least. But these guys were like, my kids loved it. And in fact, my daughter is going to graduate early this year because she's getting everything done and she's getting it's the problem with brick and mortar schools and putting 25 or 20 or 30 or however many kids you want to put in a class is that you have to teach at the speed of the slowest student. Right. And so students who are faster, who get it, to me, looking back, that was my problem in school, is that I was bored most of the time because I got it and I'm waiting around for some of the other, it was just boring. That's what the problem was. I almost flunked out of math. Why? Not because I don't get math. It's just because I was bored, more than anything else. And so a lot of these parents were discovering the joys. And I had 3 or 4 people in the chat room over the course of a couple of months say, my kids are excelling and they love it. And we're never going back. Now you had people who went back and discovered that there was some discord there, that after their kids had had a taste of freedom or they'd had a taste of this kind of different thing, that it just wasn't the same.
That's exactly right. It's not the same. And I want to add here that even as the ranks of homeschoolers and also private schoolers grows, enrollment in public schools is dropping. So we're seeing an ever increasing share of the student population is being homeschooled and also just leaving the government schools. It isn't for everybody. We homeschooled our son. It was a big commitment. It's a lot of work. Not everyone's going to want to do that. But we've also seen a lot of innovative approaches like micro schools and education pods, schooling pods, where shared responsibilities ease the burden. So, one set of parents isn't taking it all on. They might pool their kids and work with other families that share their philosophy about education. So it is something that's worth trying. It's something that a lot of people have tried and are doing. And this is important. and are doing it in a variety of different ways that suits their beliefs, their family's needs, their kids' requirements. It could be tailored to the specific kids. You're not taking a cookie cutter, one size fits a few that you get from brick and mortar schools, especially the public schools, but also a lot of private schools.
Right.
It really could fit the kid much better than a brick and mortar solution does.
Well, and that's interesting. I mean, you homeschooled your son. I homeschooled all 5 of my kids, and it was interesting to see how one child required very little supervision, right? You kind of lined them out and you said, here's what you need, and then you'd kind of round up and you'd follow up with them later. Whereas another kid, their learning style was different, their personalities were different, and you had to, handhold, you had to cajole, you had to threaten, you had to say, do this or do, and the learning style for each one of my children was different. So we had to adapt to each one in a different way, in a way that's not available in a classroom with 10 kids, 15 kids. I mean, you any more than 1 or 2 kids, there's just nothing. You want to talk about the ultimate parent or a student teacher ratio. Homeschooling is it, right? It's like kind of one-on-one. And so all these things come into account. And that's why I think people are really digging into this. Now, you've mentioned that the decline in enrollment in brick and mortar school continues. And in your numbers, I thought it was interesting. You see, 20% were going to homeschooling, 20% to private schooling, charter schooling. And then there was this missing 10%, which you kind of breezed over, but basically said they're just kind of off the books schooling in their own way, right? I mean, there's a contingent where they're like, oh, the lost student population. I don't think they're lost. I think the parents are just like, I don't trust any of you, and we're just going to do this on our own, right?
Oh, that's absolutely true. I mean, about 10% of students are kind of unaccounted for in terms of having left the public schools. Now, there are students who really fall through the cracks, and I think we need to be honest about that. And there's some kids who don't go to school. But I also know Arizona requires us to send a letter to the county saying your service is not required. We're going to be homeschooling our kid. That's all you got to do. But we didn't do that for years because there's no penalty for not doing it. I finally did it when I realized my kid was getting close to needing a learning permit to drive. And theoretically, they could withhold that if we hadn't filed the letter. So we filed that letter that year, but we would have been among that 10% up until that point because we never bothered. So that would be at least some of the unaccounted for students. Others skip kindergarten. If you're, which in most states is, I'm not sure which, I'll be honest, but at least in some states is optional. So if your kid doesn't go to kindergarten, they're among that unaccounted for 10% too. So there's a lot of DIY going out there. There's a lot of family and personal solutions that aren't the old institutional model. And I think that the educational establishment is a bit at a loss to catch up. And some of them are just hugely resistant, but some of them are also just at a loss to catch up and figure out what's going on.
Well, and this has created a bit of a fervor. I mean, I think the backlash against the educational industry, and more specifically the education unions, was so huge from the pandemic. I think they tried to play the hand. They overplayed their hand. They saw the backlash, and now they're reaping the whirlwind on some of this stuff. And they are, I mean, I don't think it's too strong a word to say that they're in a bit of a panic. They're in a bit of a panic because they're seeing that people saw through the lie that homeschooling was impossible for many of you. And they saw through some of the other things like the political underpinnings of what the education industry was trying to do with the whole California, unions, wanting social justice and wealth redistribution and everything else in their demands to reopen school. And people were a little shocked. I think when the cover came off, people were a little shocked by that, and that's led to and I think helped the underpinnings of this whole movement back to some form of alternative education.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was a huge sea change. If you remember before the pandemic, there was this national Red for Ed movement where parents are being recruited to support unions' demands for better benefits, more pay. It was portrayed as being pro-education, but it was pro-union. And then during the pandemic, those schools that went to some form of remote education, parents would stand behind their kids and see the lessons. And a lot of cases, they were really bad versions of lessons. Not much was being taught, not much was being done. And in some cases, a lot of cases, it was badly politicized. So yeah, it turned off parents that just a couple of years beforehand had been very pro-teachers union as the parents discovered what the teachers unions were actually doing on the job, which was not impressive.
Right.
And Yeah, and it fomented not just a move to alternative education, but also the parents' rights movement. You saw parents kind of clamoring for more control over classrooms and more say in the curriculum. Now they
Right.
don't all agree over what that curriculum should reflect because people have different opinions. And if you're going to have a one size fits some government solution to a problem, that means everyone's going to be battling over what that solution looks like. And that's what we've seen with these clashes at school board meetings, with arguments with teachers, with even the FBI intervening and investigating parents groups. So that turned into a huge cultural battle over what this public schools should look like and what should be taught in those schools.
Which leads to our next segment, which is going to be a discussion of why is this trickle down happening in the brick and mortar schools? What is forcing the decline, and where do we go from here? JD Tuccille is our guest, Reason Magazine contributing editor from Reason. We're going to be back with more. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty based, free thinking radio. Back with more right after this.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, we're in the break right now. JD Tuccille, our guest. We gotta work on him to get his beard up a little bit. He's got a nice beard, but he needs JD, it's a mandate. It's got to be a little fuller, got to be a little richer. It's the beard power, man. It's what keeps you going each and every day. I don't want to shine your apple too much here, but you have done such an amazing job. I always look forward to anytime in the morning when I'm clearing out my dozens and dozens of emails from the day before that, came in overnight or whatever. I'm always looking forward to the Rattler, which is JD's, it's your email blast, right? When you put a new article up, It pops up through the Rattler. So I don't even have to go search it out. If you'd like to subscribe to JD's newsletter, which basically highlights each and every article that he puts out, you can go over to Reason and sign up for the Rattler by following any of his stories. But I always look forward to talking about some of the stories. What was the one that I was thinking about? We probably won't get into this, but the whole issue over Nina Jankowicz's case, the disinformation and case, and that was just some brilliant stuff right there. I got to tell you, that was probably one of the most satisfying moments reading that article and realizing that the disinformation chief had been basically, the judge had basically said, well, you are a censor. You are censoring. That's what she's like. I'm not a censor. They've censored me. They can't censor. I'm not a censor. You're a censor. Anyway, some other good articles. What was the other one I wanted to talk to you about? I think I had asked you about getting on board with one of them, and you were, we talked about federalism, so many different things that you've been talking about. But this one really kind of got my attention because, again, of my own personal experience with homeschooling and everything else. And I think this signals that you said it earlier, a sea change. I think this is the indicative of a bigger movement, which is just, I think at this point, just going to gain momentum. What do you think?
It absolutely does. It absolutely is gaining momentum. We are more than double the share of the student population being homeschooled now than we saw before the pandemic. And if you remember, even with the numbers growing 5 years ago, people still thought homeschooling was a little odd, a little out there. They'd ask you if your kids are being locked in the closet or something. Now it's been normalized because a big chunk of the population at least tried it. And they saw that it was not only possible, but very doable. And that what the teachers were doing in the public schools was not that impressive. So the process has been normalized now, even for those who don't choose to do it themselves. That means that a big barrier was broken down, and it becomes much easier to homeschool, much more normal to homeschool. No one asks questions about why your kids aren't in the classroom because they figure out they're out in a field trip with their family. Of course they are.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that was the thing. I mean, it was before, now that everybody's tried it, when somebody says, "Oh, I homeschool my kids," they don't look at you like you got another arm growing out of your shoulder or something, right? And they're like, "Oh, okay." They know it. It's like I said, it's one of the few silver linings that came out of the pandemic. That and remote work are the two things that I think that were the big silver linings that came out of the pandemic, because it normalized both of those things, both of which I was doing at the time. So I feel really vindicated by this whole thing, right? I feel really
Same
good
here.
about it. Yeah, I feel like, yes, I've been doing this for a while. Welcome to the party, pal, And so I think it's good. But and I think that's the thing, is that people were upset because they saw, one, that they were lied to about how hard it was, and then two, just getting that peek behind the curtain at how politicized the whole education system was, that wasn't really about the kids. It was really more about social justice or politics or retaining power.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and at one point, the National Education Association, one of the big two national teachers unions, on their agenda for their national convention, had a document that the union voted to endorse, that said that critical race theory, for instance, ought to be incorporated into education.
Yeah. Well, which was immediately people like, what? Wait a second. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and critical race and DEI and social justice and the 1620 and all. What? I mean, yeah, it's insane to watch. All right, JD Tuccille, our guest, Reason Magazine. We're going to continue with him here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show continues. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all the stuff that you need to do to get us going. Here we go.
Public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke Show.
Lies. I'm just an angel. Nobody hates me. Everybody loves me. All right, let's go back over. JD Tuccille is with us, contributing editor from Reason Magazine. You'll find his writings at reason.com. You should go there, by the way, and you should subscribe to his it's not a newsletter. It's essentially an email service where every time he puts out a new article, it drops it right in your inbox. And I look forward to those every day, every other day when a new article drops. It's one of the highlights of my mornings to be able to read through what JD has written for us, and it's called The Rattler. So just go over there to JD Tuccille on Reason, and you'll find his name all over the site. There'll always be some story on the front page that's written by JD. So go over there and get signed up for The Rattler right now. We've been talking about homeschooling, and one of the interesting things that came out of this. Now, Alaska, JD, you probably know, but Alaska has probably the highest per capita population of homeschoolers in the country. Even post-pandemic, we currently have something like 7.5%, 8% of our students are being homeschooled. 23,000 out of 135,000 students are in the homeschooling system. And of course, we had some crises, and there's been other things going on. But we live and breathe that here in the state of Alaska. But one of the more interesting things out of your article was something you pointed out here just a minute ago, was that it wasn't just that homeschooling is surging again for a variety of reasons, and we've gone over a few of these. But the big thing is that people are fleeing public schools, and not just a little bit. And we've seen the decline in the state of Alaska. The decline in enrollment in brick and mortar schools has been an ongoing problem for years. And it got exacerbated during the pandemic, and it continues to this day. And that leads to a lot of other problems here in the state. It means that all of a sudden school districts have schools that are nearly empty and that they have to reduce, but they have got more overhead and more administrators and more more all this other stuff. And so they're trying to figure out how to keep the ship afloat with fewer students and a projection of continual decline in fewer students. But this is happening at a national level. Why is it going on? What is going on with that?
Parents, families, students are disenchanted with what's going on in public schools. And now they realize that they have alternatives. I mean, not just the Catholic schools and the expensive private schools of a generation or two ago. You've got a variety of alternatives with money that will follow students through education savings accounts to private schools or to homeschooling, micro schools, learning pods, all sorts of DIY solutions, as well as the old private schools, and parochial schools. So there's a variety of ways that families can choose to educate their kids, or they can stay with the public schools that really did not impress them during the pandemic, when they got a glimpse of how the teachers conduct themselves. And now that they know what's in those lesson plans, because they've seen them and they've been battling other parents over how American history ought to be taught, how modern cultural events ought to be taught, how different social concerns ought to be addressed. And people have a wide variety of opinions. And of course, they don't like their kids being, force fed somebody else's conception of how the world is or ought to be. So they're leaving the public schools and going to these alternatives. And the thing is, that is good. What that means is that instead of being stuck in the common ground octagon, where you've got to battle to the death with other parents over whether or not your kids are going to be, in your eyes, properly educated, you can ignore them and teach your kids the way you want to. It's as if we had a choice between going to the government cafeteria, where you got the government's choice of the meal for the day, or why not go home and cook it yourself? Well, of course, if that was the choice, you'd go home and cook it yourself. And
Right.
parents are now cooking their kids. Their kids' education themselves. And it's a good development, because it means less social conflict and probably in the end, better education for the kids.
Right. And I think you pointed out too that a lot of parents discovered, I think during the pandemic, and like you said, from standing over their kids' shoulders, wanting to know what was going on, they discovered the politicization of the education and the system of what was going on. And that led to, again, these conflicts of, we saw it, the McAuliffe-Youngkin battle, right, in Virginia. That was a prime example of kind of the ideas from the left, or from the big pro school union crowd of Terry McAuliffe basically saying you should have no say in what we teach your kids. And that led to the resounding thing from Youngkin. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. McAuliffe, that was kind of that come home moment where the hubris of the education establishment was on such display. McAuliffe was very closely aligned with the teachers unions, and it was them he was speaking to when he said that that parents ought not to have a say in the lesson plans for their children. And we also saw that when the National Education Association, one of the two big national teachers unions, was actually promoting at their convention the idea that critical race theory needs to be incorporated into school classrooms. We'd gotten a glimpse of that beforehand. New York Times back in 2019, I think it was, ran a big piece on how school textbooks are written differently with different political content for California and Texas, because those are two big states that centrally purchase their textbooks for the public schools and also have very different political environments. And the books are spun differently for each crowd. But now parents were seeing that on the more micro level, and a lot of them didn't like it. And they ended up battling teachers. They ended up battling school officials. They ended up battling their neighbors over what was taught in the classroom. And there's an easy exit from that. It doesn't have to be that way.
Well, we've lost sight, JD. We've lost sight of the whole idea, behind, I guess, public education. We've lost the whole mandate, which was to teach the kids basically the basics of reading and writing and arithmetic, but also to teach them how to learn. Right? That's kind of the basic. Yeah. That's what you need to teach children, is how to learn, because they obviously don't know. And then those basic foundationals to help them do just that, to learn. And we've slipped so far away from that. And now it's a fight over, it's over race or gender or justice or some kind of sexual orientation for kids who are under 10 years old. Just all this kind of crazy stuff, which has, I think, contributed to this, obviously. But this all stems from the fact that they've slipped away from the mandate of what they were supposed to teach. And because of that, we have, a slice of our population that is graduating high school functionally illiterate, that even kids who pass and get out of high school have to, take a remedial math course just to get into a basic college level math course and all these other things. The system is failing, not because of, and I'm not trying to blame teachers themselves. I'm saying the overall system itself is failing at what its main mandate was, because it's getting looped into all this ancillary political stuff that has no part. It should have no part in what's going on.
Absolutely. I mean, even before political issues in the classroom rose to the forefront, the quality of education, obviously, we were debating this for decades. And the problem is when you have a government monopoly, when there's no effective or minimal effective competition in most places, a lack of competition breeds complacency. And the schools weren't very good because they didn't have to be. People couldn't turn, at least most people couldn't turn to an alternative. As those alternatives have risen, whether they're charter schools or private schools or homeschooling, more competition comes into the system. The public schools are then, at least to some extent, forced to compete, or else they lose customers, which is what we're seeing with the rise of homeschooling and private schooling, micro schools, and such. And then the politicization enters the classroom. That's a further distraction from the core mission of the school. And it gives parents more reason to take their kids out and flee to an alternative. I'll point out this was predicted. There's nothing new about this. John
Right.
Stuart Mill was a major philosopher of the 19th century, big advocate of compulsory schooling. But he said the government should not run the school. He said if the government runs the school, it's going to turn into a battleground between competing sects. And in his time, he probably had religious sects in mind because that's who controlled most schools at that time. Now it's
Right.
ideological sects. But he predicted the battles we're seeing right now. He knew that would happen because it's inevitably what happens when you force people into a government system, is they fight over what that system looks like.
Yeah, and it should come as no surprise to anyone that these alternative schooling methods produce better results because it's a complete shift. Nobody is willing to look at the system as it sits right now and say something is fundamentally flawed. I mean, nobody's really, I mean, I have, but I mean, nobody, the mainstream, nobody's looking at it and going, it's broke, we got to fix it. But it should come as no surprise that homeschoolers, charter schools, Montessori's, pandemic pods or learning pods, micro schooling, that you shouldn't be surprised that their results are tremendously higher because they basically jettisoned the whole other system and went back to the basics of what we needed. And this is what terrifies the mainstream school movement.
Yeah, I mean, the teachers' unions, the educational bureaucrats, politicians spent a century trying to convince parents that they weren't competent to teach their own kids. They could dress them, they could feed them, they could house them, but somehow they weren't going to figure out how to put information into their minds, even though parents have been handling that for thousands of years. And to a large extent, the population bought that. Okay, a couple of generations of being told that, and they bought that. And then they had a wake-up call. They saw that, first of all, what the government was doing, in terms of its teachers and its institutions, not very good quality.
Yeah.
Things were being taught they didn't like. And that if they took it over themselves, it actually wasn't that hard to do a halfway decent job. And if you put a little more effort in, you could do an excellent job.
Right. One thing you didn't touch on in your article, which I want to get your take on, is that overall, America is in a population decline, birth rate decline, I guess I should say, not population, but birth rate decline. So we're in a birth rate decline. So there are, moving forward, there are going to be fewer students still moving forward. And like I said, part of the problem here in Alaska is we built up this big school system with all these buildings and teachers and infrastructure and administrators. And yet the student population continues to get smaller and smaller. So they're trying to figure out how to get more and more money for the students that they do have to prop up this behemoth that they don't really need. And that's going to be played out across the country as the birth rate continues to decline. What do you think is going to happen? What's your take on that?
Well, it puts enormous pressure on institutions that are brick and mortar. I know that near me, one of the public schools was sold off recently to a private concern because they simply don't have enough students to put in it, and they don't anticipate having enough students to put in it for decades to come, at least. We are in a demographic decline. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is for other people to argue about. But the population is going to peak and then decline, and the student population, the population of youth, is already smaller. So what's remarkable is to look at alternatives to the public schools and see that the numbers of students there, not just as a share of the population, but in terms of raw numbers, is rising, which kind of emphasizes the fact that people are fleeing the public school system, but also pressure on the schools, you're absolutely right. They're maintaining infrastructure that they don't need anymore, that costs money and sucks it away from what would be used to teach students. And that's probably going to hasten the exodus from the public schools, as they have less, as even the assets that are allocated to them, less of that are going to be going to the actual education and more to maintaining old infrastructure until they get around to repurposing it or selling it off.
Yeah, because they're not willing to let it go. They're not willing. I mean, up in Fairbanks, they had to close a school up there, and the comments from the public on Facebook and all the supporters were like, "Oh, they're shocked! I can't believe it! How can we do this? What?" Never realizing the ultimate cost of keeping an empty school open, or a school at 30% capacity when you've got schools down the streets that are at 50% capacity. Why don't you combine? Oh, we couldn't do it. It's this nostalgia for, well, I went there, so it should always be open, and yada yada. They're unwilling to reduce the size of their footprint. I mean, that's government's problem in and of itself. It continues to expand. It never wants to contract, even when it makes sense. And that's just a microcosm of what we have here.
Also, if you look at the ranks of administrators in this public school systems, you'll see that they're not shrinking quite so much as the student population is. In fact, they're generally staying static or still growing. That happens with bureaucracies across the board.
Yeah, we've seen it. We had a study here in the state done by the Alaska Policy Forum where they looked at it and they said, it used to be that it was 1-for-1 teacher for administrator, sometimes 1 for a half, but over the course of the last 30 years, it's gone up to 1-for-2, 1-for-3, and in some instances, almost 1-for-4 teachers to administrators. And it's become a jobs program for administrators, and the money doesn't make it into the classroom anymore. Teachers have to come out of their own pocket for school supplies because they're paying some guy down the hall to be a, I don't know, counselor, whatever his administrative position is. They're just not willing to admit that there's something's wrong, that they need to fix it.
Yeah. And I want to be clear, I'm not trying to villainize teachers as such here. I know I've met some awful, really bad teachers over the years, but I've also met a lot of good ones who are incredibly frustrated in a bureaucratic system where they're outnumbered by administrators whose needs are prioritized over classroom needs. Yep. And a lot of those teachers end up fleeing and end up working as private tutors and homeschooling their own kids because they don't want their kids subject to the environment that they see around them in the classroom. So there are a lot of decent teachers who are struggling in that environment, although there are some bad teachers too.
We saw some teachers flee the system here locally that went out and started their own micro schools, and God love them. I mean, that you know what? There's an option for teachers who want to be paid more, have more success, and don't want to be burdened with all that administrative overhead. You could become a tutor, micro school. You could start one. You could become part of a pandemic or a learning pod. All those things are available to you. JD Tuccille is our guest. We're going to continue with him one more segment. I think we're done with education. We're going to pick another story to dive into because JD is so prolific on his writing here. We'll be back with more of the Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes,
allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
JD Tuccille, our guest here in the break. Brian says it's a bit of a pyramid scheme, isn't it? As the childless adults increase, the frustration of paying property taxes will only hasten the decline. The tax base will narrow. Property values will drop. I mean, that's the thing. It's the doom loop, the self-licking ice cream cone of, you get fewer people move out. You got fewer people to cover. They have to pay a higher amount, which forces them to leave, which goes, and of course, government never wants to pull in its horns, never wants to admit that they need to reduce the size of their footprint, in this case, in education, and add to that the demographic drop and everything else. It's, this, like I said, I think this is a beginning of a fundamental change in American educational society.
Oh, absolutely. And we're also seeing a shift in how people live. I mean, we talked before briefly about the boom, not just in homeschooling, but in remote work, which has allowed people to relocate where they want to live, not where they have to live. And part of that, what we've seen resulting from that is people are leaving a number of the major cities like New York and Los Angeles and moving to small and mid-sized cities instead. It's the small and mid-sized cities that are growing, the big ones that are shrinking. That puts further institutional pressure on the infrastructure that the big cities have built, much of which is kind of bureaucratized, not well maintained to begin with. And now you've got that emptying out, and then people are just kind of changing the way they're living, and that calls for flexibility in society and for people, but it's a flexibility that governments generally are not very good at demonstrating.
Yeah. And of course, the answer to this is, again, we've talked about it. ESA accounts, backpack funding would be the best ideal. Those kind of things, that kind of choice. And of course, that is facing such tremendous pushback from brick and mortar and the education industry because they lose control. They lose money. They lose their position where they've been because it gives the parents the ultimate choice. And that is, that is the bottom line, but I don't think they can stop this ship. I think it's moving in the direction it needs to.
Yeah, we're seeing some pushback here in Arizona. We've got a Democratic governor who's kind of wholly owned by the teachers union, and she's trying to limit our very expansive school choice programs. But there's so many parents and so many families that are benefiting from it at this point that if she does too much to please her teachers union sponsors, she loses the votes that she wants to get in the next election, and it's a losing proposition for her. People now are just familiar with the idea that schooling is teaching kids. It's not just sending your kid to some government institution. It's what you choose for them, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon.
Well, the hypocritical part of that whole thing is that's what the unions are always chomping at in the public eye. Maybe not in their own, their own forums and their own big gatherings and rallies and everything. But in the public forum, it's always about, it's for the children. Don't you want the children to read? If we don't do this, the children will be out on the streets and they'll be living homeless because they can't read and they can't, it's always about the children. But in the end, we see how much money is actually making it into the classroom. We see the actual scholastic achievement and we realize it's not really about the kids. It's about power. It's about money. It's about maintaining the position and control that they have right now.
Yeah, if you care about the kids and their education, then you fund the education wherever it's found. You don't fund some building that just happens to have a government employed, a teacher in it. So but that's where you see the priorities. It's if you care, you don't fund the institution, you fund the kid.
Yeah. Well, we're hoping to be able to push some of that stuff. Of course, we've got, we got a Blaine amendment here. We're fighting against that. We're trying to find more choices. Alaska's been on the cutting edge with things like, distance correspondence schools that are funded by actual districts. All my kids went through the Galena City School District, which is a little tiny village way out in the bush, but they created a distance learning program. It was one of the first in the state. And that was allowed them to take state money and give it to parents to be able to do what they needed to do. It's a fraction of what regular brick and mortar schools, but it still definitely works. And I think that should be a pilot program for many other states out there, and we should be doing it. So this is a battle that we're going to be fighting here in the state for a while. I know you probably haven't been following Alaska, but we had this huge battle this last legislative session over an increase to the base student allocation. The per student funding formula. And they wanted to triple it. They literally wanted to almost triple it. And they only got a slight increase this go around, but it was so much caterwauling going on about it. And so much, why do you hate children? Why do you hate teachers? Always making it about the students or the teachers, not about administrative and overhead. I think we're going to see this battle play out here again and probably in other states.
It absolutely will. We have an ESA program here that gives a fraction. I think it's 2/3 or 3/4 of the per student allocation to families to use as they please. And the families prefer that because they don't have the same cost as the school district in terms of paying for boilers and administrators. They don't need to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's crazy. All right, JD, I think I want to touch on your article. This is actually from a couple weeks ago, back in the end of July. You talk about the wave of political violence, and I want to talk a little bit about, the assassination attempt and then Kamala coming, the switch. But what does it mean? And now, of course, this thing with Raskin, who says he's going to use the Constitution to try and prevent any kind of change of power. There's a lot of things going on here, and I want to get your take on that as well. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Here we go. All right, we're finishing up here. JD Tuccille, our guest, contributing editor, Reason Magazine. I always love to have him on, and I try and abuse my time with him as much as possible. We're going to stretch to another topic. He wrote an article back at the end of July talking about the wave of political violence has no end in sight. And, of course, he was talking about the attempted assassination of Trump. But there's been a lot of other things that have been going on as well, and we're seeing more surveys now that are saying political violence is an acceptable means to change and other things that are going on. Of course, we've now seen President Biden step back. Kamala Harris is up in the forefront. That's raised some questions. And now, Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland has said he is going to basically utilize Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to basically not allow him to take power if he does win, kind of thing. And so we're getting we're setting the stage for a whole different thing. We've reached a point in our political discourse in this country, JD, where it's anything to keep the other guy from winning is kind of what it feels like. So let's talk a bit about this political violence and the not so isolated incidents that we've been talking about recently.
Yeah, I mean, I started obviously with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, which it's amazing how much that's already dropped out of the news at this point. But in a real way, that's because of the normalization of a really, what I would call a historically bizarre political environment. Our political system is delegitimized. And I think we ought to be clear about that, is that the major political tribes think that outcomes are legitimate only if they win. And that if their opponents win, that's inherently illegitimate. So it's not about having a vote, seeing who wins the election, and then working within constrained exercise of powers as dictated by the Constitution. It's all about seizing control and crushing your enemies. And that creates an environment where political violence, political conflict, dehumanizing your opponents becomes not just acceptable, but the norm. About a week and a half, 2 weeks after the attempted assassination of Trump, a guy in Michigan went on a rampage, tearing down political signs. There were pro-Trump signs on his neighbor's yards. And then when the neighbor came out to put it back up, he ran the guy over with an ATV and put him in critical condition. The guy, he then called the police, admitted what he'd done and then killed himself. So the tale doesn't get any better, as it goes on. It's just horrible across the board. But it didn't even make really splashy national news because we're kind of in this low-level simmer now of these kind of events. Violent protests, cops, roughed up, people attacking each other depending on which political side they're on. Political headquarters firebombed. 3 political offices in, I want to say Indiana, were firebombed earlier this year. We're seeing this stuff on an ongoing basis because we're in a period of political warfare, kind of a political Cold War, where the sides are not going to accept losses. They feel that they're at existential risk if their enemies exercise power. And the problem is, to a certain extent, they're right, because the people in power then really are engaging in lawfare. They're using the FBI, they're using the courts against their political enemies in ways that don't seem to be normal uses of the law. They aren't normal uses of the law. They're attempts to punish and suppress the opposition. And I don't think this is going away. I think we're in something that approaches what Italy went through in the 1970s, the years of lead. And I think we're not entering it. I think we're in it. I think we're kind of like that frog in the pot that's boiling. We're boiling in the midst of America's years of lead, and it's going to continue for a good long time.
Yeah, no, and this is, I mean, I don't want to get too, I don't want to get too conspiratorial here, but this seems like this is right out of the whole rules for radicals kind of divisiveness and stirring it up to the point to where the chaos, starts and somebody can try and grab the reins of power out of the chaos. I mean, that seems to be kind of the playbook, and it really does. And it's so funny that you mentioned the years of lead, because I just went back and I was watching a documentary about that recently, and it's so astonishing to see some of the parallels of what was going on, and the fact that at some point the government was actually behind a lot of this. Actual government agencies and government employees were in sanctioned issues, were actually stirring this up and killing people and causing this violence and things like that. We're not there yet, but we're at the tipping point to where, nobody can be happy with this. Like the guy in the ATV who ran over the old man, he kills himself over politics. Right? Not only does he hurt somebody else, he kills himself over politics. At what point in this country did how did we reach this point?
We reached this point by, I would say, I mean, you and I think I come from the same place on this, but when you make government so powerful, they're going to reach far, far into your life, into every aspect of your existence, and then and you centralize that power, so there's no escape from it. You create a situation where people of opposing opinions cannot afford to lose elections. When you make a government that powerful, it's going to essentially transform your life every time power shifts, especially as hostilities develop between the political factions. We now, Republicans and Democrats don't just dislike and oppose each other; they hate each other. They think each other are threats to the republic. They think each other are indecent, immoral. Each other are dangers to their ways of life. And in a way, they're right, because they've made each other right on that issue. They've made each other too dangerous to take power. There are ways out of this, but those ways involve politicians giving up power, decentralizing it, moving it down to the local and hopefully the individual level. And those are such unlikely solutions for government officials to ever opt to unless forced, that I think we're going to be stuck with this simmering Cold War. Well, not even Cold War, for quite some time to come.
It's interesting. You referenced this University of Chicago study on political violence, where they said that they found that 10% of the respondents agreed that the use of force is justified to prevent Donald Trump from becoming president. But in all told, they broadened it out even more. And it wasn't just about Donald Trump. It was just about their opposition. And the numbers got even larger. I mean, 10% is scary enough, but it got even larger when they broadened the whole issue out to, when do you find political violence acceptable?
Yeah, and it was that was actually a separate study. The Chicago one found that 10% would support violence to prevent Trump from taking office, and I think it was 7% to put him in office. But then another study asked, okay, broader, when would you use political violence? And across 17 different political issues, they found that a total of about 30%, about a third of the respondents, thought that political violence was justified in order to achieve their goals on those political issues, which means that people are convincing themselves, they're talking themselves into not just working outside the system, they're talking themselves into legitimizing the use of violence against their political opponents in order to achieve their goals. That's not healthy for any political system, and certainly not for one that for a long time was relatively immune to the trials of, say, an Argentina or even much of Europe that's consumed their countries for decades.
This worries me more than anything else. I mean, quite honestly, because again, as a libertarian, I'm kind of like, I just want to be left alone. I'm not so, I do this for a living, but I'm not so emotionally invested in it that I feel my whole identity is wrapped around in it. There are plenty of people who do feel that way, though. Their whole identity is wrapped around this. And it is creating kind of this powder keg situation where if something goes wrong, or I guess if something goes right for one side, it goes wrong for the other, and it could create a potential for, I mean, civil war is not I think too loose a term to jump in on this. You got about 90 seconds here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And it's not going to look like blue versus gray in the 1860s. It's probably going to look more like Spain in the 1930s, which was more awful because there's multiple factions that were loosely allied on two different sides. You didn't necessarily have recognizable uniforms. You had no rules of warfare. It was just a horrendous situation to be in. And that's the kind of thing we could find ourselves sliding into. We just wake up one day and realize we've passed the point of having a tumultuous country and entered one that's kind of in civil war, an actual civil war. And the more you delegitimize the idea of the opposition winning, and the more you insist the government has to have the power to punish your enemies when you take power, the more you make that almost inevitable.
Yeah, and like you said, it's no longer a Cold War. It's about to be a hot war if we don't make some changes, and that's part of the problem. JD Tuccille, our guest, Reason Magazine. JD, thanks so much. You can go over to Reason.com and sign up for the Rattler. Folks, tomorrow is Firearms Friday. Be kind, love one another, live well. The Michael Duke Show. All right, JD, I mean, you don't put it in the article, and I'm not looking for you to be the answer man, but how do you think we fix this? How do you think we de-escalate this, the outlier, the us versus them, the they? Anybody who's not me is a they, and that makes them. How do we How do we fix that? How do we slow this down or reverse it? I mean, what do you think?
The fixes are, I mean, the ones I mentioned, I think are clear, but they're also incredibly unlikely to be implemented. The fixes are decentralizing power, giving government less say in our lives, and moving power down to the local level and closer to the individuals so that you have fewer people who are subject to rules that they really resent. And that if they don't like them, you can move and you can get away from that. Voting with your feet is a lot better than voting with a bullet. And you kind of leave people the option between the two if you make government excessively powerful. But governments don't like giving up power, and they certainly don't like handing it back down to the state or local level, which would make it easier to escape control if you don't like what the local rules are. So I don't have a very optimistic view of the future. I think that we're probably going to see this escalate until something catastrophic happens or a series of catastrophes that kind of forces a reset. And maybe then we'll see the de-escalation, the decentralization, and letting people coexist, perhaps, in communities that live by different rules.
Well, you're right. I mean, it used to be that when people, in the days of the founders and the framers, if you didn't like what was happening in Virginia, you could move down to Rhode Island. You could move to, if you could move with your feet if you didn't agree and go be with like-minded people, which is kind of the essence of libertarianism and voluntarism. We want to associate with people that we want to be with. But the decentralization, as you said, it's a solution, but damn near impossible. I mean, when they gain that much power, they do. It's something that Jefferson said something about I was 1826 or something. So it was just a dozen years or so after the Constitution had been finally ratified all the way around. And he said, we made a mistake because government consolidates unto itself power that it does not relinquish. And that's part of the problem. The more power it gathers, the less likely it is to relinquish it. And even though it would be the solution to this problem, there's a vested interest in keeping it and keeping everybody down and keeping everybody under their thumb. And even if it does blow up, oh, well, I guess, I mean, that seems to be the way, but we've got to set this stuff aside and stop being so vitriolic and being so wrapped up in it and having it be part of our identity that this kind of stuff would be life ending. If one president or another gets elected, then it's the end of my life kind of thing. And that unfortunately, that's where we're at for many people in this country.
It is existential. And I would advise people to kind of hunker down come election time and then come inauguration time and just take care of yourselves, your families, and your neighbors, and stay away from demonstrations at that time. I mean, that's just a great way to get into trouble.
Yeah, I'm not going to be spending a lot of time out there waving signs, or doing anything like that. I'll be in the bunker counting bullets or something just to make sure that I'm, that I'm okay. But I am worried about this, and to see it and to watch it, and again to see the numbers where people who are justifying it, and that I wanted to try have Emma Camp on today. I couldn't get a hold of her, but she just wrote a couple articles talking about the on campus and the free speech aspect of it, where people are now saying. Between 10 and 30% are saying that the First Amendment gives us too much freedom, gives us too much power to say things and I'm just like, where have we come in this country that we can't even say things that people disagree with without it becoming this battle of not just a disagreement of ideas. Oh, you believe that, I believe this. Oh, it's okay. We could still go have a beer. Instead, it is, you don't believe what I believe. I'm going to come over and burn your house down. And that's what people, and then they justify it. So you got these two things. People say free speech isn't great. And then they got your studies you're talking about saying political violence is acceptable. It's not too far of a bridge between those two things to see stuff going on. And, you said it would be like Spain. I interviewed the guy who, one of the guys who went through the Civil War in Serbian Civil War, Yugoslavia, as Yugoslavia broke apart and everything else. Yeah. And that's terrifying. What he described and what was going on is exactly what you're talking about. Modern day stuff. That is a terrifying thing. And we do not want to be part of that if we can avoid it at all. Final thoughts, JD.
Final thoughts is that we live in interesting times. And the best you can do is take care of yourself, your family, your neighbors. I saw one of your, in the comments, one of your commenters said, don't take other people's stuff and leave them alone and be ungovernable yourself. And that's really good advice. Don't subject yourself to the rule of people who hate you, but also don't try to subject them to your rule. we have to learn how to live our own lives and leave each
Right.
other alone, and then kind of force our politicians to do the same. And that's
Yeah.
not going to be easy.
I was going to make a T-shirt that said "Libertarians trying to take over the world to leave you alone." Right? I mean, that's kind of where it's kind of what we want. We just want to be left alone. Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff. That's my buddy Matt Kibbe. And then be ungovernable. That's all you can do. Do what you can do in your own local. And that's why I've said everything comes back down to you, your family, your neighborhood, your community. That's where you can make a difference. And that's what we should be focused. This national stuff is it's out of control. The internet has killed us for that stuff. It used to take a week for information to trickle out of Washington, D.C. And by that time, people were not nearly as mad about it. Now it happens 3 seconds later and everybody's infuriated. It's crazy stuff. Anyway, JD, are you working on anything you want to tell anybody about before I let you go?
Yeah, I'm writing a piece today on how the CrowdStrike fiasco seems to have been in part due to European Union regulations. They impose regulations. Yeah, they impose regulations on Microsoft that compromise the security of their system and kind of guaranteed that a problem in one place would metastasize across the system. So it wasn't the entire problem, but it was a big chunk of it. That's going to be interesting.
All I can hear is Reagan in the background going, "Government is the problem." Right?
Usually is.
That's all I can hear in the background with that. Well, I look forward to reading it, my friend. Thanks so much. I appreciate you coming on board and joining us today.
Thanks for having me on. You take care.
As always, it's great to talk with you. Thanks so much. JD Tuccille, our guest, Reason Magazine. All right. I mean, it's spooky, folks. I'm a little worried about kind of where everything's going because you start seeing those things and people justify that kind of stuff. You want to know why I go forth armed? That's why I go forth armed every day, right there. All right, my friends. Well, we're out of it today. We got more coming up tomorrow with Firearms Friday. Be kind, love one another, live well. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll see you then. Oh, by the way, don't forget to check out the Common Sense Corps if you want to support us. Big thanks to Brandy and to David and to Donna, all new members or returning members to the Corps. We appreciate you guys for helping us out. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great day.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show. you.